There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a review of Elizabeth Bowen's second novel, published in 1929, The Last September. This is my first anything by Elizabeth Bowen, and I think I may well have found a new favorite writer. I have to read more by her, obviously, before deciding. There's a lot of one-hit wonders out there in Shawn the Book Maniac's reading life, but boy, this novel mesmerized me. I didn't love everything about it, but I ended up giving it 5 stars because what I loved more than the things that kind of bothered me. And I also felt that reading the introduction at the end helped put a bunch of things together for me, and I wish that for once I had read the introduction. I think there's probably many editions of this book. In my edition, the introduction is by Victoria Glendenning, and I wish I had read it before. I usually avoid reading introductions before launching into the fictional text like the plague, but this is one time where I would recommend it. If you are not familiar with Irish culture and history, the story is set in 1920 during the time of Troubles, the War of Independence between the British soldiers and the Black and Tans and other Irish revolutionaries, 1920. The story happens in a landed estate in County Cork, an Anglo-Irish family headed by the Nailers, who are at least lower rung nobility, and the central character is their niece, Lois, an orphan, 19 years old, a little bit ditzy, and pretty much consistently fascinating. And there's another cousin on the other side of the family living there, and the house is so spacious and described in such vivid detail that really the house, also known in the story as Danielston, is the central character and one of the most alive characters in the novel. Very much modeled on Elizabeth Bowen's childhood at Bowen's court, her family's hundreds-year-old estate that she has written memoir about as well, apparently. I was not that familiar with the time of Troubles, but what I was taken with almost immediately in this story is how detached most of the characters were from what was going on literally yards away. The Black and Tan revolutionaries were skulking. They thought that they were probably being watched out on their spacious terrace at night by the militants. And there was just an air of unreality about especially the Nailers, the uncle and aunt who lived there. So much was not said, but you quickly pick up on the social and psychological dynamics at work. And as you get farther into the story, and this is where the introduction helped me out a lot, in retrospect, is that as Anglo-Irish whose family has lived in Ireland for generations and generations, they feel a sense of divided loyalty. They are not completely on the side of the British soldiers sent from England to quell the revolution, and they are not completely supportive of the IRA that is fighting for independence. That is rendered so subtly that if you aren't really grounded in what's going on socio-historically, it's easy to miss or not really absorb. But that is one of the powerful elements of the story. Setting that aside, and I don't want you to set that aside, but the other thing that's really going on here is young 19-year-old naive Lois'S coming of age. She is coming into her own as a sexual being. We do actually read about her first kiss, and she gets a crush on a British soldier. And that is the central love story. This is not a love story, but that's the central romantic plot of the story. And really, as any 19-year-old, or most 19-year-olds, like for example, I'm 19 years old, and I'm the same as Lois, which is to say she is a bit flighty and overtaken by powerful surges of emotion and no doubt sexual energy, but then changes her mind about how she really feels about the guy 10 minutes later, and that is rendered with such precision. Let me cut to the chase. The reason that I highly recommend this to you is not for anything that I've just said, it's for the gorgeous literary, crafted within an inch of its life sentences. The prose here is just stunning, and I would say sometimes, to temper the gushiness of what I've just said, sometimes to a fault. What I've found out in the introduction and maybe some other Googling I did, she was very much going through a Henry James phase when she wrote this Like I say, it was published in 1929. There were a few sentences that were too Jamesian for me, because I don't like Henry James. But most of it was evocative of Hardy, and sometimes wackily constructed grammatical tours de force. If you like gorgeous writing, if you're interested in a coming-of-age story from this era set in that setting, you must try it. I hear from people more knowledgeable about and familiar with Elizabeth Bowen's work that this is not her best work. Her best work was to come, but this was stunning. I can see that it's probably not her best work because there are a lot of characters in here that are not that interestingly rendered on the page that I thought could have been left out or de-emphasized. There is a visiting married couple, and they have been family friends for years, but they haven't seen the Naylors or Lois since Lois was a very young girl, and they weren't very interesting. There's a bunch of other characters that just didn't really add much to the story. The real characters here are Lady Naylor. She is amazing. You know, she might be 60, I don't know how old she is. She is so distractedly controlling and put together. Just a fascinating character study. And really, Lois. Lois makes the novel. So let me close by reading you a passage that shows Lois after she has been out to an all-night dance with a lot of the local girls, most of them Anglo-Irish, not all of them Anglo-Irish, some of them Irish, at a dance for the British soldiers, and they've been dancing all night. And her relationship with her British soldier has made quite a bit of progress overnight, and his name is Gerald, by the way. And now she's back at the house, Danielston, and she's walking around kind of in a daze, reliving the memories and kind of projecting into the future. And there are brief encounters with this man who's visiting and staying at the estate for an extended time. His name is Mr. Montmorency. And he's just kind of a good-for-nothing, privileged dolt. His wife is very sympathetic towards Lois. He is just kind of oblivious to anyone other than himself. So we start out with the pronoun she, and that's Lois. When she reached up to the top of the hedge, her sleeves fell back from her arms, and she thought of Gerald. She felt him looking at her through the thinning stems. The sweet peas were practically over, and indeed she was glad, she thought, snipping and tugging with blunt garden scissors. In yesterday's dusk, the square with its flitter of leaves had been all autumnal. Smoke was blue in the air, and later, the dark where they kissed had a sharp intimation of autumn. She loved in autumn a stronger, more shadowy, keen spring, sweet shocks of goodbye, transition. Summer, meanwhile, stayed on inside these walls, forgotten. The fact was that though one determined tonight to sit under the lamp and learn verbs, her Italian or German would not dispose of last night, which remained, like the tear in her green tulle dress, to be dealt with practically. After an anxious glance at the possible, a pain so sharp that it seemed her own forbade recantation. It was inevitable that she should marry Gerald. Mrs. Montmorency, at least, she thought with relief as she came to the red sweet peas, would be infinitely sympathetic and pleased. The unbelievable future became fixed as the past under the flutter and settling down of a flock of comments, which, as she turned in imagination back to the house and steps and saw lips forming themselves in unconscious readiness, seemed already uttered. And as Mr. Montmorency came up a path at an angle, with the two garden kittens toppling after him, she was surprised he did not repeat, "Well, I hope, of course, that you may be happy, and decision of any kind is an excellent thing in your mother's daughter." Instead, he came to the other side of the hedge, and, picking off some bleaching tendrils, observed that the sweet peas would soon be over. The house flowers must keep her busy, he added. And, taking out his pocket-knife, he cut 3 sweet peas, with precision. Having made this gesture of sympathy, he continued to move with her down his side of the hedge. "It is extraordinary," said Lois. "I feel as if I had been away for a week." "Yet you find us going on much the same?" He looked at her through the stems ironically, but without intelligence. And she could not try to explain the magnetism they all exercised by their being static, or how, after every return, or awakening even from sleep or preoccupation. She and those home surroundings still further penetrated each other mutually in the discovery of a new lack. So that's one of my favorite passages, but there's plenty more where that came from, people. So if that floats your boat, I heartily recommend that you give Elizabeth Bowen's 1929 novel, The Last September, a try. Thanks for watching.